saying, like, we're a resilient species, we can endure conditions that are not comfortable or almost painful. But if that part continues to get hurt, if the trauma continues to be instigated in different social spheres, then it goes into hiding so much so that the protector sometimes exiles the younger part that's been traumatized. Because once the traumatized part continues to expose itself in the system, if it repeatedly is getting hurt, the protector's going to come in and banish it, essentially. Otherwise, those vulnerabilities and that pain is going to continue to be felt. Does that make sense? So sometimes the protective, this is called the protector-defender psyche, or the structure in our psyche that protects and defends. It's going to exile the vulnerable parts that are in pain to keep the overall system in as close to thriving in its survival mode as possible. So in order to survive, if those painful parts just go into hiding and into exile, then we can continue with our daily tasks. Essentially, so that we don't have to risk feeling those vulnerabilities again by the same part that's been wounded. Yeah? So the protector-defender that sends parts of the self into exile has the interest of helping, of course, but that's usually not the outcome. And so this is the defensive structure, it's called. The parts that step in to protect the overall system. And it's a universal feature, cross-culturally psychological phenomenon of this defensive structure. We all have it. And the defense parts that grow up too fast, that's our armor. That's what Pema Chodron, the Dharma teacher, refers to when she says spiritual practice is just a daily undressing of removing more and more armor. So we all have the defender parts that have built up to protect the vulnerabilities, the young, tender, ripe, raw, wounded aspects of self. Some of which have just gone into hiding, others of which have been completely exiled. So in level 1, we focus a lot on calling the parts back in, ones that haven't had a place for a long time with us. And arriving in your meditation or practice, arriving at Hara, means you're welcoming everybody back in. And I just want to note this, we tend to think of traumas as these big life events that really veer us off course. Death or a car crash. But everyday trauma is relevant here too. Little things just like being ignored in a social setting when we wish to speak our truth. And that part of us that really has something to say that no longer feels like what they have to say is important. She starts going into hiding because she's not being listened to. So anytime that we need something, that a part needs something, and we don't attend to it, or if others don't attend to it before we learn how to attend to it ourselves, right? The maturing spiritual hood of our feminine selves is learning to become our own mother. When we don't attend to the needs of our parts, then that's a trauma. That's what Mark Epstein, he calls the trauma of everyday life. So it's little ways every day in which we tend to harden and split. Splitting into the vulnerable part that hasn't gotten its needs met, and the other defensive, hardened part that says, I'm going to hide you so you don't have to feel this again. So trauma is any time that a need isn't being met, and this nervous system can't process in real time the fact that our needs, our basic survival needs or loftier ones, aren't being addressed in that moment. So trauma is stored in the body because in that moment, if we can't process it somatically and funnel it through the system, It's going to be stored somewhere until we can process it, which is the beauty of a yin pose, is setting a structure for whatever aspects of the self have been wounded to feel safe and spacious to be heard. There was a interview. Donald Cowshed is a spiritual psychologist, a neurobiologist. And in an interview, a woman asked, he speaks on the defensive structure, and a woman asked him, so is this defensive structure limited to just those who have suffered trauma? And have you met anybody, she asked, have you met anybody who doesn't have this defensive structure system? So I'll read you his answer. I wrote it down like furiously as I was listening to his podcast. So she raises her hand and asks, is this defensive structure you speak of limited to those who have suffered severe traumas? Have you met anybody ever who doesn't have this system, this defensive structure system? And he says, no, myself included. It's a universal system. Not all of us have unbearable trauma, but we're all maimed to some degree. We all grew up in a home or society where only parts of ourselves have been allowed to blossom, where other parts were unacceptable and have been locked away in a hidden recess of our beings. Few of us move into the second part of life, having lived in the first life in an environment fully seen, mirrored, validated, and allowed to live. We will all have constellated some type of protective system. If you haven't suffered trauma as a child, the system won't be as rigid or extreme, but will still limit your potential and prevent you from being fully alive if you don't learn about it. So meditation is one of those places where we don't have to hide from ourselves. And mindfulness is the development of an attitude of courage to see what's here and who is here with us. And so the defensive structure, knowing that it comes online, the engagement in the narrative of why this came to be, oh, that happened when I was 5, and so this armor bearer came in and she never got the needs she met at that time, or my ex-boyfriend didn't serve that. There is a productive element to that kind of talk therapy and analysis, but it's insufficient and it has a limited time frame. Otherwise, we're just continuously getting drunk on the narrative of the ways that our needs haven't been met. So instead, it's about just hosting consciously what's here now. And just creating a template in which the organism can resonate with difficult frequencies. To deal with material and allow it to integrate. And the thing is the longer you practice, the more delusions you'll find. It's never ending. It's like remodeling the home. So it's this endless process of cracking the armored shells of the defensive structure and finding deeper and deeper areas of vulnerabilities. So the self-critic and the wounded parts isn't something that the end goal is not to exterminate and to just get through all of them to this point of just being completely integrated without parts. It's just that the defensive structure will have less impact on the hardening of your exterior if it's known directly, if you relate to it, if you can unblend and befriend it. So part of meditation is dealing with your conditioning, your social conditioning, and being able to choose what's worth giving your allegiance to. Like, oh, this is important. This is a hardened defensive structure, let's give it some attention. So you can listen to the messages from all of your parts, but you don't have to believe the content of all of them. You get to decide the central self what's real. So some needs might be raising their hand, and you can listen to those requests, but decide that that's not of service to the central self. So that's refined negotiation. Because the subtle dimensions are, and evolution is by definition never a fixed ending point. It's a constant unfolding.